They called my granddaughter a gold digger while living in her house. So I made them regret ever being born that day. I never thought my daughter's engagement would lead to the most infuriating day of my life. My name is Elaine Cooper. I've spent decades building a successful career in Boston, where I live with my husband Thomas, a retired architect whose calm demeanor masks an unwavering set of principles that I've come to rely on over our 30 years of marriage. Our only daughter, Natalie, is everything a parent could hope for: intelligent, poised, and determined. At 28, she's already made a name for herself as a project manager at Granite and Coning, respected by colleagues and secure in her position. Thomas and I couldn't be prouder. When Natalie first introduced us to Bryce Dalton, I tried to keep an open mind. He was 30, a contract employee at a small logistics firm, raised on a farm in rural Maine. They'd met at a financial workshop through mutual friends. His soft-spoken manner and attentive listening initially charmed me, though something in my gut whispered caution. "He's so different, Mom," Natalie would say. "He listens to me. Really listens." I nodded and smiled, ignoring the subtle unease I couldn't quite place. As months passed, I began noticing patterns. Bryce artfully dodged questions about his finances. He relied on Natalie for transportation, either having her drive him to work or pick him up from the train. Their dates always seemed to happen at suspiciously affordable venues, which he justified as simplicity being best. Once, I watched him sit comfortably as Natalie paid for dinner. I convinced myself this was normal for their generation: equal partnerships, shared expenses. But the math never seemed equal. The proposal came without a ring. When Natalie proudly showed me a sparkling diamond weeks later, her explanation sent a chill through me. "He picked it out. I just paid for it," she said with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. When I tried to probe deeper, she changed the subject. In family discussions, Natalie became Bryce's staunch defender. "He's different from other materialistic men," she'd insist. Thomas remained quiet during these exchanges, but I noticed him watching Bryce with increasing scrutiny. The Daltons contributed nothing to the wedding expenses. Their excuses ranged from "can't sell the farm's harvest this season" to philosophical statements about saving for the future of the family. Something about their reasoning always felt calculated rather than principled. Then came Natalie's request that broke my heart. "Mom, Dad, I know this is a lot to ask," she began one evening at dinner, "but I want to start my marriage from a position of strength. Would you consider giving us the house gift before the wedding instead of after?" Thomas and I exchanged glances. We'd already planned to gift them a home after the ceremony, but Natalie's urgency raised alarm bells. Despite my reservations, Thomas agreed. "I don't want my daughter living in some cramped apartment when she gets married," he said privately to me later. So we purchased a beautiful house in an upscale Boston suburb, and Thomas poured himself into redesigning it. He personally selected every fixture, oversaw every renovation, what I lovingly called his final labor of love for our daughter. The day the house was completed, Thomas called me excitedly. "Come see what we've built for our girl," he said, his voice warm with pride. "We've given her a solid foundation." Our moment of joy was short-lived. As we approached the front door, a shrill female voice echoed from inside. "Why is this neighborhood like a prison? Every house with doors shut tight. It's absolutely wretched." Thomas and I froze. Who was this woman? Who would dare speak this way in our daughter's home? The vague discomfort I'd been suppressing crystallized into sharp vigilance. I didn't yet know what was happening, but I was certain of one thing: it wasn't normal, and it wasn't right. As Thomas reached for the door handle, I caught his eye. The concern I saw reflected back told me he felt it too. Whatever waited for us inside would change everything. We pushed open the door to find the house we'd lovingly prepared for our daughter overrun with strangers. The woman with the shrill voice turned out to be Joyce Dalton, Bryce's mother. She wasn't alone. Her husband Russell, their older son Troy, his wife Melanie, and a 5-year-old boy named Luca were all moving furniture and boxes around as if they owned the place. "What on earth is happening here?" I whispered to Thomas, who looked as stunned as I felt. No one had called us. No one had asked permission. They had simply decided to move in. Joyce spotted us and waved dismissively. "Oh, you're here. Bryce didn't mention you were coming by." She continued directing her husband where to place a battered old recliner that clashed horribly with the elegant living room Thomas had designed. "Bryce!" Joyce shouted. "Call someone to remove this gate at the community entrance. It looks like a prison. How can people live somewhere where neighbors keep their doors shut all day? It's unnatural." Thomas's jaw tightened, his architect's pride wounded by her casual dismissal of the exclusive neighborhood he'd selected for its safety and privacy. Just then, Natalie arrived home from work, her expression shifting from confusion to horror as she took in the scene. "Mrs. Dalton," she began carefully, "I wasn't expecting everyone today." "Well, surprise." Joyce laughed without warmth. "The family's all here now." Natalie, ever the diplomat, tried to salvage the situation. "There are some wonderful community activities nearby. Maybe you'd like to join the neighborhood associations." "We don't have time for playing cards to make friends." Joyce cut her off with a sneer. I watched in silent fury as the Daltons wandered through the house, opening doors to each room, examining furniture and fixtures as if taking inventory. Not once did anyone acknowledge that this home belonged to Natalie, or thank us for providing it. Joyce sauntered into the master bedroom and sprawled across the bed, her dirt-covered shoes staining the custom duvet Thomas had imported from Italy. Russell lit a cigarette and casually tapped ash onto the polished limba wood side table. "Joyce, we have certain rules about smoking in the house," I began, but she acted as if I hadn't spoken. From another bedroom, Troy's voice carried, "This room will work for Luca. Melanie, call Jenna and tell her to move our stuff over." Through all of this, Bryce stood silently by the entryway, head down, saying nothing. Natalie looked shell-shocked, her mouth opening and closing without words. Thomas's face had darkened, but he held back, watching. I kept quiet, too, waiting to see how our future son-in-law would handle his family's invasion. Joyce returned to the living room, announcing to everyone, "This house is far too big for just 2 people. What a waste. Our family will arrange to stay here. Much more practical. Natalie won't mind, will you, dear?" She turned her gaze to my daughter, adding with a poisonous smile, "After the wedding, you'll take care of meals, laundry, cleaning. Good practice for being a wife." Rage boiled inside me. Thomas squeezed my hand, a silent message to wait. This was Natalie's battle first, and we needed to know if she could fight it. To my relief, Natalie straightened her spine and found her voice. "This is a gift from my parents to me. Who gave you permission to move in without even asking me?" Joyce's eyes narrowed. "My son's house is family property. If you're already giving orders before marriage, who would want to marry you?" The tension in the room thickened until it was hard to breathe. Natalie stood at a crossroads. Back down now, or set a boundary that would define her future. I realized with sinking clarity that this was only the beginning. We hadn't yet seen the full extent of what the Daltons would do to get what they wanted. And the only thing holding them back was my daughter's potential weakness. I caught Thomas's eye across the room. The silent question between us was clear. Would Natalie stand her ground, or would she surrender her home and her dignity to keep the peace? The atmosphere in the house grew increasingly frigid. Tension spread from room to room like a toxic gas. Natalie maintained her politeness by sheer force of will, but I could see the shift in her eyes, from confusion to dawning disappointment. Russell Dalton emerged from the master bedroom, stretching like a man who'd owned the place for years. "This room has excellent light and a nice view," he announced casually. "We'll take this one." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. The master bedroom had been Thomas's pride. He'd designed the space with Natalie in mind, selecting every detail from the custom window treatments to the perfect morning light. Troy, Bryce's older brother, gestured to a smaller bedroom next door. "This will work for Luca. Melanie, call Jenna and tell her we can end our rental lease. No point wasting money on rent anymore." Through all of this, Bryce kept his head down, remaining completely silent. Not a word of protest, not a single attempt to intervene. Natalie kept glancing at him, clearly waiting for him to say something, anything, to defend their home. That's when I truly understood. Bryce's silence wasn't nervousness or conflict avoidance. It was agreement. He had known about this plan all along. Russell's next suggestion pushed me to the edge of my restraint. "We should transfer the deed to Troy's name," he said, examining the crown molding with a critical eye. "That way, Luca can have a stable home for school. Natalie and Bryce can stay comfortable here too, and we'll figure out something permanent once they have kids." I felt Natalie's hand tighten into a fist beside me. Thomas's eyes narrowed dangerously, clearly weighing exactly how much to intervene. "This is a wedding gift from my parents to me," Natalie said, her voice stronger than I expected. "It's not a family boarding house." Joyce rolled her eyes dramatically. "Listen to her. Not even married yet and already so high and mighty. Don't think having a house makes you special." She wagged her finger at my daughter as if scolding a child. "My family didn't raise you to serve us, but as a daughter-in-law, you need to learn to care for the whole family. You should consider yourself lucky. In some families, you'd have to live with your mother-in-law for life." Natalie took a deep breath, visibly struggling to maintain her composure. "I'm drawing a line here. I won't allow anyone to disrespect what my parents have worked for." Finally, Bryce spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Could you lower your voice a bit? They're my elders." The betrayal that flashed across Natalie's face broke my heart. She turned to face him directly. "And what about you? You're a man, my future husband. What role are you playing in all this?" Bryce shrugged, avoiding her eyes. "I don't want to cause tension. They're just talking. Don't make such a big deal out of it." Joyce inserted herself between them. "If you don't like housework, hire a maid. Anyone can see you're not the type who knows how to maintain a home." She glanced at me with a smirk. "Or maybe Elaine can help out. She looks like she knows her way around a duster." My fingers trembled with rage, but I remained silent, looking to Thomas. He raised his eyebrows slightly, his message clear. "Let Natalie handle this herself." We needed to know if she could. The transformation in my daughter was remarkable. The soft affection in her eyes had vanished completely. It wasn't that she didn't love Bryce anymore. She had simply recognized a devastating truth. Love couldn't save her from being exploited. Joyce lowered her voice to a menacing whisper. "Your daughter thinks money gets her whatever she wants? My family isn't pathetic. We just think further ahead than you people do." Natalie exhaled slowly, her decision visibly solidifying. "If this is truly how you see me as a daughter-in-law, then I'm sorry. But this marriage isn't worth pursuing." The room fell silent. I felt a surge of pride at my daughter's courage. But before any resolution could form, Russell delivered the killing blow. His voice was cold and precise as he said, "You think you have any value on your own? If it weren't for this house, my son wouldn't even consider marrying you." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Natalie's face drained of color. Thomas stood perfectly still, a storm building in his expression. The truth was finally laid bare. To the Daltons, we weren't family. We were resources to be drained. Natalie wasn't a bride. She was a transaction. The house wasn't a gift. It was payment for their son. In that moment, looking at Bryce's downcast eyes and nervous fidgeting, I realized he had never contradicted his family's assessment. He had never corrected their view of Natalie as a mere provider of material comfort. Perhaps he had even encouraged it. Every red flag I'd noticed, his avoidance of financial discussions, his comfort in letting Natalie pay, his insistence on her buying her own engagement ring, suddenly formed a complete picture. This wasn't about love. It had never been about love. The silence stretched on for what felt like minutes, though it must have been only seconds. Natalie stood frozen, processing the full weight of Russell's statement, that her worth to her fiancé was measured solely by what her family could provide. I watched my daughter's heart break in real time, and with it, any remaining doubt about what needed to happen next. Russell's words hung in the air like a death sentence for any remaining illusions. I felt as if I'd been stabbed in the chest, not because he had insulted me, but because he had reduced my daughter to nothing more than a financial transaction. I turned to look at Thomas and saw he was standing ramrod straight, his face darkened with a fury I hadn't seen in decades. Natalie finally roared, all pretense of civility abandoned. Enough. Bryce, if you truly think like your father, then get out of my house right now. Instead of supporting her, Bryce grabbed her wrist, his voice pleading but with an undertone of control that made my skin crawl. You're overreacting again. You always take things too far. You can't just get angry every time something doesn't go your way. Natalie yanked her arm free and stepped back. I'm not overreacting. I'm clearer than I've ever been. Joyce let out a bitter laugh. If my son marries you, he'll be miserable for the rest of his life. You're not worthy of him. All you know is how to take, not how to sacrifice. Something in me snapped. I stepped forward until I was inches from Joyce's face. Say one more word, and I'll show you what disrespect really looks like. Russell took a deep drag of his cigarette and deliberately blew the smoke directly into Thomas's face. His voice was smug with challenge. So this is how you raised your daughter? To be disrespectful to her elders? What happened next occurred so quickly I barely had time to process it. Thomas calmly set his water glass on the table, then drove his fist straight into Russell's face. The impact sent the older man flying backward into the wall, his cheek immediately swelling with a purple bruise. Troy started to lunge forward, but Thomas fixed him with a glare that froze him mid-step. One more word out of a piece of garbage like you, and I'll throw you down those stairs myself. You're all insane, Joyce screamed. I'm calling the police. Go ahead, I replied with ice in my voice. And be sure to tell them how you trespassed in someone else's home, commandeered the bedrooms, damaged property, insulted the homeowner, and provoked violence. Bryce started to stammer some excuse, but I slapped him hard across the face before he could finish. That's for every insult to my daughter that you sat by and allowed. Joyce grabbed Bryce's arm, stuttering incoherently as she pulled him toward the door. Russell was struggling to get up from the floor, one of his shoes having flown off during his fall. Thomas kicked the shoe toward him. Take it and get out. Remember, next time I see you, it won't just be a punch. As the Daltons were physically pushed out the door, Joyce continued to shriek. My son deserves better than this. You think your daughter is so precious? The entire Dalton family stumbled down the front steps, a pathetic sight compared to their arrogant posturing just an hour earlier. Troy practically dragged his wife behind him, while Russell limped with one shoe on, his face already swelling dramatically. When the door finally closed behind them, Natalie remained completely still in the center of the room. She didn't cry. She didn't collapse. But I recognized what had happened. My daughter had crossed through pain and emerged on the other side with a newfound strength. I approached her carefully, not wanting to break the fragile composure she had built. Natalie. Don't, she whispered. I need a minute. She walked to the window and watched as the Daltons piled into their cars, still yelling and gesturing wildly at each other. The neighbors had come out to watch the spectacle, several of them filming on their phones. Thomas came to stand beside me, his right hand flexing. I took it gently, examining his knuckles. Are you hurt? I asked. Worth every bruise, he muttered. Natalie turned from the window, her face pale but determined. I want the locks changed tonight. Thomas nodded. I'll call someone right away. And she hesitated. I don't want the ring anymore. I paid for it myself, but I can't look at it. I put my arm around her shoulders. We'll handle everything, sweetheart. As I held my daughter, I realized that what had just happened, as ugly as it was, had saved her from decades of manipulation and abuse. Sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes you need a clean break, or in Thomas's case, a well-placed punch. After being thrown out of the house, Bryce Dalton vanished completely for nearly a month. No text messages, no emails, no phone calls. The Cooper family and Natalie thought the nightmare was finally over. During that time, Natalie began putting her life back in order. She moved Bryce's belongings out of the house, rearranged the space, and discarded everything connected to the Dalton family. I helped her burn the engagement ring's box in the backyard fire pit one evening, a small ritual of cleansing that seemed to give her some peace. She continued going to work as usual, but became noticeably quieter. She didn't discuss what had happened with anyone at Granite & Co., simply focusing on her projects and keeping her emotions tightly controlled. Thomas and I worried about her, but recognized she needed space to process everything. She'll talk when she's ready, Thomas assured me one night. She's always been like that. Processes things internally, then comes out stronger. One evening, Natalie returned home and wordlessly handed me her phone, her expression a mixture of disbelief and bitter amusement. He just sent me an email, she said. I looked down at the screen. The subject line read, "Regarding what you still owe me." Attached was a meticulously detailed spreadsheet itemizing every expense Bryce had allegedly incurred for Natalie during their relationship. The file contained over 50 detailed lines, from a $4.50 coffee and a $12.30 Uber ride to a $20 Valentine's Day gift and a $68 dinner at a mid-range restaurant. He'd even included an $18 charge for birthday cake for her mother. The grand total, $2,197.36. The email concluded with, "If you transfer the funds promptly, we can resolve this amicably. Otherwise, I'll be forced to discuss this in person at your workplace." My blood boiled, but Thomas just sighed heavily, shaking his head in disgust. Natalie let out a bitter laugh. "Mom, I bought him a $200 iPhone and gave him $1,500 when his father was sick. And now he's demanding $2,800 from me?" I decided this petty harassment would not go unanswered. I called my secretary and asked her to schedule an appointment with Human Resources at Granite & Co. "What are you planning?" Thomas asked after I hung up. "If he wants to make this public, let's make it public," I replied. A few days later, in the lobby of Granite & Co. Suburb, Bryce, Joyce, and Russell Dalton appeared during the morning rush hour. They carried a large sign reading, "Ms. Natalie Cooper owes us $2,197.36. Joyce was yelling, demanding to see the HR director. My son loved her, cared for her, supported her, and now she's tossed him aside like garbage. Natalie and I had just stepped out of the elevator when we saw the entire floor frozen in shock, our colleagues staring in confusion at the bizarre scene unfolding. Bryce stood in the corner, head bowed, apparently embarrassed, while Russell held up a sheet of paper, loudly reading each expense. 2 Starbucks coffees, March 15th, $9.80. The crowd began to snicker. Someone called out, "Is he charging her for cookies too?" I stepped into the center of the lobby, facing Joyce directly. "You say my daughter owes you money? How much exactly?" Joyce shouted, "Almost $3,000, and she's pretending nothing happened." I pulled out my checkbook, wrote a check for $3,000, and held it up in front of Bryce's face. "Here, take it. That covers everything. Now get out of my daughter's life." The moment the check fell into Joyce's greedy hands, I launched my counterattack. "Now it's my turn. Would you like me to itemize what my daughter spent on your precious son? I began reciting from memory. Brand new iPhone, $1 and $200. Russell's hospital bills, $1,500. Birthday gifts, meals, plane tickets to Maine, nearly $3,000, not counting miscellaneous expenses. The crowd gasped. A coworker whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. So they actually owe her money? I enunciated each word clearly. My daughter isn't asking for any of what she gave freely to be returned. But let me tell you something. Being poor isn't a crime, but being shameless certainly is. Joyce stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing wordlessly. Bryce tried to back away, but the entire floor was staring at him as if he were some strange specimen under a microscope. Russell attempted to argue, but Granite's security staff had already moved to escort them from the premises. Consider the money a gift, I concluded. But Your Honor? That's been dragged through the mud permanently. Throughout the entire confrontation, Natalie hadn't said a word. But in her eyes, I saw something powerful emerge. The realization that this humiliation wasn't hers to bear. It belonged entirely to them. As security escorted the Daltons out, applause broke out across the floor. Natalie's colleagues gathered around her supportively. Her supervisor, a stern woman who rarely showed emotion, placed a hand on her shoulder. "Take the day if you need it," she offered. Natalie straightened her spine. "Actually, I have a client presentation in 20 minutes. I'd rather stay." As we rode the elevator back up to her floor, Natalie finally spoke. "Thank you, Mom." "For the check? It was worth every penny to be rid of them." She shook her head. "For believing me, for showing up, for not letting them make me feel small." I squeezed her hand. "No one gets to make you feel small, sweetheart, especially not someone who never deserved you in the first place." When the elevator doors opened, Natalie stepped out with her head high, ready to face her day with newfound strength. In that moment, I knew we'd made it through the worst, and my daughter would emerge from this ordeal not diminished, but fortified. We thought after the humiliation at Granite & Co., Bryce and his family would disappear for good. We were wrong. 1 week after the incident, Natalie showed me her phone. She had received a text message from an unknown number. "I'm sorry. You're all I have. Please give me one more chance." She didn't respond. A second message arrived a few days later, followed by a third. "If you don't come back, I don't know what I'll do." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This wasn't just someone trying to reconcile. This was emotional manipulation bordering on a veiled threat. I immediately contacted my old law school friend, Patricia Holden, who had become a respected attorney specializing in harassment cases. "This is classic escalation behavior," Patricia warned after reviewing the messages. "We should file for a temporary restraining order as soon as possible." She advised us to preserve all messages, letters, and screenshots as evidence. Before we could even submit the paperwork, Natalie discovered an anonymous post circulating on social media. It featured old photos of her, manipulated video clips, and a vicious caption: "Real-life gold digger, scammed boyfriend for money, rejected him for being poor, dumped him without remorse." Though Bryce's face had been blurred out, anyone in the industry could easily identify Natalie. The post was being shared in private professional groups related to her field, clearly designed to damage her reputation among colleagues and potential employers. "This crosses every line," Patricia said grimly when I forwarded the links. She immediately sent cease and desist letters demanding the content be removed and began the process of filing civil charges for defamation and harassment. The stress began to take its toll on Natalie. She developed insomnia, lost weight, and frequently lapsed into anxious silence. Though she continued going to work, she limited her interactions with colleagues. I tried to reassure her with what little wisdom I had gained through my own life's battles. "He can only drag you down if you let go of your own rope," I told her. Stand firm. This will pass. A week later, Natalie received an unmarked envelope at her office. Inside was a handwritten letter from Bryce, filled with nostalgic reminiscences and claims that she was the last light in his life. But the final line sent chills down my spine. If you leave me forever, you're making a man lose his mind. You know what that means. After reading the letter, I called Patricia immediately. There was no more time to waste. We needed a formal restraining order now. The implied threat was clear enough that even the most conservative judge would recognize the danger. Natalie and I went to the courthouse together the following day, carrying folders containing every message, letter, screenshot, and social media post as evidence. As we sat on the hard wooden bench waiting for our case to be called, Natalie stared straight ahead, her knuckles white from clenching her hands, eyes red but dry. When she signed the restraining order application, she whispered, "I know I'm doing the right thing, but why am I so exhausted, Mom?" I squeezed her hand tightly. "It's not exhaustion, sweetheart. It's recovery. Healing takes more energy than hurting does." 10 days later, the court approved the restraining order. Bryce was legally prohibited from coming near Natalie, calling her, texting her, or contacting her through any social media platform. The relief on my daughter's face was palpable when Patricia called with the news. We forwarded all documentation to Granite & Co.'s legal department to ensure workplace protection and prevent any future incidents. The HR director personally assured Natalie that security had been briefed with Bryce's photo. "This time, we don't wait for an apology," I told Natalie as we filed the paperwork away. "He doesn't get another chance." That night, I found Natalie sitting on her balcony, looking out at the stars. For the first time in weeks, she seemed peaceful. "What are you thinking about?" I asked, settling into the chair beside her. "I'm thinking about all the red flags I ignored," she said quietly. "How I made excuses for him because I thought love was about accepting someone completely." I took her hand. Love is about accepting someone's authentic self, not their manipulations or cruelty. "I know that now," she nodded. "I also know that I deserve better." As we sat in comfortable silence, I realized that something profound had shifted. The restraining order wasn't just a legal document, it was a declaration of boundaries, a statement that Natalie valued herself enough to protect herself from harm. The practical measures we'd taken, changing locks, installing security cameras, documenting everything, were important. But the most crucial change had happened within Natalie herself. She had recognized her worth and refused to compromise it any longer. Thomas joined us later, bringing mugs of hot chocolate like he used to when Natalie was a child. "The security system's all set," he reported, "and I've informed the neighborhood watch about the situation." Natalie smiled at her father. "Thanks, Dad. For everything, including that punch." Thomas chuckled. "Some problems can't be solved with words alone." For the first time in months, we laughed together as a family. The threat wasn't completely gone, but we had reclaimed our power from it. Bryce could no longer control our lives through fear. After the restraining order was granted, Natalie began rebuilding her life, piece by piece. She declined all social invitations and dating opportunities, choosing instead to pour her energy into her work at Granite & Co. "I need to remember who I am before I can think about being with someone else," she told me over dinner one evening. Within 2 months, her dedication paid off. Natalie was assigned 3 major internal projects, showcasing her exceptional talent for strategic management and client negotiations. Her boss pulled me aside at a company function to tell me how impressed they were with her resilience and focus. "Your daughter has a remarkable capacity to channel adversity into growth," he said. "We're considering her for a leadership position much earlier than we'd normally promote someone her age." I noticed other changes too. Natalie began investing in herself in ways she never had before. She joined a weekend yoga class, enrolled in a short business leadership course at the Cambridge Institute, and gradually regained her natural vibrancy and sharp wit. The haunted look in her eyes faded, replaced by a quiet confidence that was beautiful to witness. Thomas and I could see the transformation clearly. Our daughter was no longer defining herself through someone else's approval. She was building her worth from within, brick by brick, day by day. The real turning point came when Granite and Coir selected Natalie to represent them at the Northeast Business Conference, an event that attracts hundreds of entrepreneurs, investment funds, and major corporations. She spent weeks preparing her presentation on sustainable growth strategies in uncertain times. I attended the conference incognito, sitting in the back row. When Natalie took the stage, I barely recognized her. Gone was any trace of the wounded young woman from months before. In her place stood a poised, articulate professional whose confident delivery and sharp analysis captivated the room. The Q&A session afterward demonstrated her mastery of the subject matter. She fielded challenging questions with grace and intelligence. Following her presentation, several prominent financial figures approached her, business cards in hand. Among them was Julian Blackwell, co-founder of East Bay Capital and heir to a San Francisco financial dynasty. Unlike the others, he didn't launch into his credentials or ask for her contact information. Instead, he simply thanked her for her insights and recommended a book on strategic leadership. That was refreshing, Natalie told me later. He actually listened to what I was saying instead of waiting for his turn to speak. A week later, a package arrived at her office. Inside was a handwritten note from Julian and a copy of The Infinite Game. His message was simple, but thoughtful. I learned a great deal from your perspective. This is something I read recently that I thought you might enjoy. Reading the letter together, I recognized something important. This man wasn't trying to impress or pursue my daughter. He genuinely respected her intellectual contributions. The contrast with Bryce couldn't have been more stark. Over the following weeks, Natalie and Julian maintained moderate contact, meeting at industry discussions, workshops, and occasionally for coffee, to exchange professional ideas. It wasn't dating or flirting, but rather two minds exploring ideas together. Julian never pressed for more, never asked about her past, and never intruded into her personal affairs. For Natalie, this created a safe space to rediscover trust. After a seminar in Cambridge one evening, Julian drove Natalie home and pulled over halfway. With characteristic directness, he said, "I don't know if you have room in your life for someone right now, but I want to be clear. I like you. Not for your intelligence or your appearance, though both are remarkable. It's because when I'm with you, life itself feels more meaningful." Natalie was quiet for a long moment before responding softly. "I don't know what the future holds, but I'd be willing to find out with someone like you." The change in Natalie's life was subtle, but profound. There were no more tense dinners where she carried the entire financial and emotional burden. No more demanding text messages or manipulative behaviors. Between her and Julian existed equality, respect, and a gentle exploration of possibilities. Several months later, Julian invited Natalie to meet his family in San Francisco. Thomas and I were invited as well, which already spoke volumes about their intentions. The Blackwell family wasn't what any of us expected. Despite their considerable wealth, they lived in a warm, tasteful home without ostentation. They were intellectual, unpretentious, and treated us like old friends rather than people to impress or exploit. Mrs. Blackwell had baked a blueberry tart from scratch after learning it was Natalie's favorite dessert from a casual conversation months earlier. Mr. Blackwell took Thomas aside at one point and said, "Your daughter isn't just brilliant, she has integrity. Our family values that above all else." I watched the dinner unfold with quiet joy, thinking to myself, it doesn't take elaborate displays or grand gestures, just eyes that don't judge and hands that don't demand. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, Natalie was experiencing what it meant to be accepted without having to prove herself worthy. She didn't need to justify her existence, finance someone else's comfort, or shrink herself to make room for others' insecurities. As we drove back to our hotel that night, Natalie gazed out the window at the San Francisco lights. "It feels strange," she said. "What does, sweetheart?" I asked. "Being valued just for being myself." Her voice caught slightly. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop." Thomas reached back from the driver's seat and squeezed her hand. "Not everyone is Bryce, honey. Some people actually deserve you." I saw her smile in the reflection of the window. Small, cautious, but real. Healing doesn't happen in a straight line, but my daughter was finding her way back to herself, stronger than before. One afternoon, as Natalie was leaving the Granite and Comets building, she froze. Standing in the corner of the parking lot was Bryce Dalton. His face was gaunt, his eyes cloudy and unfocused. She called me immediately. "Mom, he's here, in the parking lot." "Stay where you are." "We're calling security right now," I told her. My heart racing as Thomas was already dialing on his phone. But before we could do anything more, Natalie whispered, "I have to go. Julian's here." Bryce approached her, his voice hoarse and bitter. "So you replaced me that quickly? You think you'll be happy with him?" I learned later that Natalie had met his gaze directly, her voice steady. "You have no right to ask me that." Bryce moved closer, his expression revealing a dangerous instability. "Do you have any idea what I lost when you left me? You destroyed my life." Before Natalie could respond, Julian stepped out from his car behind her. He moved beside her with quiet confidence. "She asked you to stay away. You're violating a restraining order." Bryce started to argue, but Julian cut him off firmly. "I've already alerted security. If necessary, I'll provide the security camera footage to the police." For the first time, Bryce had no comeback, no manipulation tactic. He backed away, seething with anger, but powerless. He looked at Natalie one last time. She stood tall, neither afraid nor sympathetic. He turned and walked away. No one called after him. No one tried to soften the moment. It was over. That evening, Natalie and I took a walk by the lake where she used to play as a child. The water was calm, with just a gentle breeze rippling the surface. "You know, Mom," she said thoughtfully, "I used to think loving someone meant accepting everything about them. But now I understand. Love isn't about trading away yourself." I squeezed her hand. "You've learned the most important lesson. Peace comes from knowing what you deserve, and having the courage to refuse what you don't." She smiled, gazing out at the water. "I don't need someone to save me. I just need someone who walks alongside me. And if there's no one, I'll be fine on my own." A month later, Natalie was invited to be the keynote speaker at the Young Business Leaders Forum. Her speech, "Career and Personal Worth, Two Lines That Should Never Intersect," resonated deeply with the audience and circulated widely through entrepreneurial networks. Julian sat in the front row that day. When she finished speaking, he was the first to stand and applaud. Not as a boyfriend, but as a proud partner who recognized her brilliance on its own terms. On the drive home, Natalie took Julian's hand, her eyes fixed forward on the road ahead. "This time," she said, "I'm not walking this path to please anyone else. I'm living true to myself." And for the first time in many years, she didn't look back. Watching my daughter's transformation has been the privilege of my lifetime. She once believed love could save everything. Now she understands that no one rescues us better than ourselves. In that realization, I knew my daughter had truly grown up. This story doesn't end with wedding bells and grand declarations. It ends with something far more valuable, a profound peace that comes when a woman once treated as a resource transforms herself into something untouchable for those who don't deserve her. Thomas and I hosted a small dinner party last weekend. Natalie arrived with Julian, both of them laughing about some private joke. I watched her move through the room, confident, at ease, fully herself. When Julian disagreed with her during a discussion about market trends, she didn't shrink or apologize. She articulated her position more clearly, and he listened with genuine interest. Later, I overheard Julian tell Thomas, "Your daughter's perspective changed how our company approaches emerging markets. She sees patterns others miss." The pride in Thomas's eyes mirrored my own feelings exactly. That night, after everyone had left, I found Natalie's old engagement ring in my jewelry box where she'd asked me to keep it. "What should we do with this?" I asked Thomas. He considered it for a moment. "Sell it. Add the money to Natalie's investment account." I smiled at the poetry of it. The symbol of her past exploitation would become part of her future security. I don't know if Natalie will marry Julian or anyone else. What I do know is that she'll never again mistake exploitation for love or sacrifice her dignity for acceptance. She'll never again believe that her worth is determined by what she provides to others. The girl who once bought her own engagement ring now understands that the most valuable thing she possesses isn't anything that can be purchased. It's her unwavering knowledge of her own worth. And that, more than any wedding gift, is what Thomas and I had hoped to give her all along.